So, what do you know about pirates? Most people probably have an idea of them from fiction and adventure films. Few have not seen Treasure Island or Pirates of the Caribbean. However, these adventure tales contain fiction based on the author's imaginations. But what were real pirates like? How can we distinguish between the fantasies of writers and screenwriters and the truth? Where can we find indisputable historical facts? Let's turn to national archives, particularly the National Archives of England, where we found information about real historical figures who were pirates. In this video, we will tell you the whole truth about them. In popular culture, pirates are often depicted as romantic characters setting sail in search of freedom and treasure. Pirate treasures in caves, chests filled with gold, the Jolly Roger, and other pirate paraphernalia have always captivated the imagination of generations of maritime romantics. In real life, these bandits often had short careers, and their life paths usually ended on the gallows. However, there was more than enough romance in the fates of some characters. When you start reading the materials from the English archives, these yellowed papers describing the exploits of pirates, you inevitably come to the conclusion that some adventure films on the pirate theme might be a bit dull. Before us are the materials from the investigation and trial of Charles Vane's gang, a real person who served as the prototype for many literary and cinematic heroes. His image is even used in cult computer games, and many have probably encountered this name and know some facts about the legendary bandit's biography. By the way, some plots of films and computer games are not made up but reflect events that actually happened in history. The National Archives of England contain documents about Charles Vane and the cutthroats who surrounded him. These documents are mainly records from pirates, also documented. Little is known about Vane's early life. Before becoming a pirate, he lived in Port Royal, but was probably not born there. Some historians claim that Vane was born in England around 1680, but there is no documentary evidence of this. One of his first pirate ventures was leading a camp to a wrecked Spanish ship in 1715 off the coast of Florida. By 1717, Vane was commanding his own ships and was one of the leaders of the Pirate Republic in Nassau. A year later, Vane was captured but agreed to cease his criminal activities and declared his intention to accept the royal pardon. However, just a few months later, he and his crew, including Jack Rackham, returned to piracy. Once, when the royal fleet tried to corner Vane in Nassau, he set fire to his recently captured flagship and directed it straight at the British ships, causing panic. Vane captured a small 20-gun sloop, the Catherine, and escaped on it. The pirate easily captured new ships, but also easily parted with them. On November 23rd, Vane spotted a large frigate, but when he raised the Jolly Roger, the frigate displayed a French naval flag and opened fire with its cannons. Vane's brigantine and sloop did not have sufficient gun armament, and he ordered a retreat. The brigantine's crew considered this an act of cowardice, and he was relieved of command in favor of Calico Jack Rackham. Vane and 16 others who supported him, including his first mate Robert Deal, were put on the sloop. Vane captured sloops along the way, one of which was commanded by Deal. However, luck eventually turned against him. The sloop on which Vane was traveling was wrecked during a terrible storm. He miraculously survived and found himself on an uninhabited island, where he lived for several days, feeding only on raw sea urchins, turtles, and bird eggs. How's that for romance? But then Vane's life took a turn. He was spotted from a passing English ship, which approached the island to replenish its water supply. Vane gave a false name and was taken on board. However, his joy at being rescued was short-lived. He was invited to dinner with the captain. Vane washed up, cleaned himself, and got himself in order, but apparently in vain, because during the dinner, the cleaned-up bandit recognized the captain. Vane was seized and handed over to the authorities. In port, he stood trial in Jamaica, and on the quiet sunny morning of March 29, 1721, was hanged in Port Royal on the territory of the English fort. However, the morning could only be called quiet conditionally, because outside the fort walls, a drunken crowd of pirates and port prostitutes reveled around the clock, who did not care about the execution of the once formidable Charles Vane. Ending his life absolutely destitute and on the gallows, after his execution, his body was hung on chains for the public to see the joyful inhabitants of Port Royal. By the way, Port Royal at that time was, to put it mildly, a peculiar city. Here is a brief historical note. In ancient times, Jamaica was inhabited by Indians. The island was discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1494. By the time the Spanish arrived, Jamaica was inhabited by the Arawak Indians, numbering about 60,000. But during the period of Spanish rule, all the Indians disappeared and their number reached zero. The Spanish claim that the Redskins died out on their own, but this is not certain. About 70 years later, the English drove the Spanish out of there and established their colony. Because why not? Initially, Port Royal served as a safe haven for privateers, for pirates cruising the sea lanes to and from Spain. If you don't know, privateers were state-sponsored pirates allowed to rob ships of unfriendly states. The authorities issued them so-called letters of marque, official licenses for robbery and murder of citizens of countries that did not please their monarch. And this was to ensure that people of the wrong citizenship did not live and sail where they should not. And the English monarch had long arms that rummaged through the entire planet. No, don't get us wrong, we don't dislike England. It was just the way things were back then. It was necessary to lay the groundwork for future generations. Of course, there is none of that now. So the harbor of Port Royal was large enough to accommodate their privateering ships and provided them with a place to stand and repair. The city was also ideally located for raids on Spanish settlements. Then, in 1657, to solve their defense problems, the local governor Edward Doley sought help from outright bandits, the so-called Brethren of the Coast. These Brethren consisted of a group of pirates who were descendants of buccaneers, robbers who stole for resale. They turned to piracy after being robbed by the Spanish and subsequently expelled from Hispaniola. The governor of Jamaica issued letters of marque to these bandits so they could legally rob the Spanish. Around the same time, when pirates were invited to Port Royal, England launched a series of attacks on Spanish ships and coastal towns, sending newly appointed privateers after Spanish ships and settlements. England successfully created a system to protect Port Royal. Spain was forced to constantly defend its property and the population of coastal towns, but Spain could no longer supply its colonies in the New World with industrial goods on a regular basis. This led to the rise of Port Royal, and by 1659, more than 200 stone buildings, houses, shops, and warehouses surrounded the fort. Merchants and privateers worked together in what was called forced trade. Merchants sponsored trade operations with the Spanish, while also sponsoring the city. Forced trade became almost a way of life in Port Royal. Geographer Michael Pawson wrote that almost all wealthy residents of Port Royal seemed to have an interest in privateering. Forced trade quickly made Port Royal one of the richest communities in English territories in America. Incomes far exceeded any profit, including that obtained from sugarcane production. Historian Nuala Zahadia wrote that the raid on Portobello in 1668 resulted in looting worth £75,000, more than 7 times the annual export of sugar from the island, which at Port Royal prices at the time did not exceed £10,000. In the 1660s, the city became a pirate paradise and acquired a reputation as the Sodom of the New World, where most of the inhabitants were pirates, bandits, or prostitutes. When Charles Leslie wrote his History of Jamaica, he included a description of the pirates of Port Royal. This is what he said about the pirates. Wine and women dragged their wealth to such an extent that some of them were reduced to beggary. It is known that one gave a prostitute $500 just to see her naked. Another bought a barrel of wine, put it on the street, and made everyone who passed by drink. The screams from street fights, the constant noise of revelry, music, and the laughter of drunken people did not stop every night until morning. At the height of its popularity, there was one drinking establishment for every 10 residents in the city. In July 1661 alone, 40 new tavern licenses were issued. At that time, about 10,000 people lived in Port Royal. But to be fair, in addition to thousands of prostitutes and pirates, there were 4 jewelers, 44 tavern keepers, and several hundred craftsmen and traders in the city. So not everyone just drank, partied, and indulged in debauchery. Some actually worked. Let's continue with the life stories of real historical figures who engaged in piracy in the Caribbean. The next batch of archival documents will tell us about a pirate named Bartholomew Roberts, who did not live to see the gallows, like all normal pirates, but died in battle. Roberts' death shocked the pirate world, as well as the Royal Navy, local merchants, and civilians who considered him invincible, and some even a hero. However, his accomplices were still hanged. You see the original sentence of the bandits, which in Russian translation sounds something like this. You and each of you are found guilty and sentenced to be returned to the place from which you came, to the place of execution. Outside the gates of this castle, and there in the floods, you will be hanged by the neck until you are dead, 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 and may the Lord have mercy on your souls. By the way, according to the old good English tradition, the bodies of the bandits were hung on chains for public viewing and bodily pleasure of honest citizens. So what was the famous deceased pirate known for, and why were his closest associates hanged? However, the spectators of this execution understood this very well. When one of the condemned, David Simpson, noticed in the huge crowd a woman named Elizabeth Tingle, whom he had raped when the pirates captured the town of Anse in August 1721, he shouted to her, "Did you come to see me hanged?" Such is the romance in quotes. Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart, in Welsh his name is Barty, born John Roberts, was a legendary pirate who, if judged by the ships captured, was the most successful pirate of the golden age of piracy. He captured 500 ships off the coasts of America and West Africa from 1719 to 1722. He is also known for creating his own pirate code and coming up with the first version of the flag, a skull and crossbones. However, pirate codes were written by different pirates in different versions. Usually, a group of sailors, having become pirates, drew up their own code or articles, which provided rules of discipline, the division of stolen property, and compensation for injured pirates. Violation of the code could result in the pirate being marooned on an uninhabited island or killed. Here are some quotes from Bartholomew Roberts' pirate code, for example. Every man has a right to vote in important matters, has an equal right to fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time, and may use them at his pleasure, unless scarcity makes it necessary for the good of all to vote for a reduction of consumption. No one gambles for money on board. No one hits another. Quarrels are settled on shore with sword or pistol, and so on. Pirate articles varied from one captain to another, and sometimes even from one voyage to another, but in general they were the same, including provisions on discipline, requirements for each crew member's share of the treasure, and compensation for each crew member. They were asked to sign or make their mark on the articles, and then take an oath of loyalty or honor. The oath was sometimes taken on the Bible, but there were exceptions. For example, the men of John Phillips, not having a Bible, swore on an axe. Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart, began his seafaring career in 1719 as the second mate of a slave ship, the Princess, under the command of Captain Abraham. One day, while at anchor, the ship was attacked by pirates and captured. Bartholomew joined the pirates, whose leader, by the way, was also a notable figure named Howell Davis. They say that Roberts initially did not want to become a pirate, but quickly saw the advantage of this new way of life and saw in it a great opportunity for himself. Witnesses say he said something like this: "Service brings wages and hard labor. No, I will not live as before. Now a merry and short life will be my motto." In the merchant fleet, Robert's salary was less than £4 a month, which in today's money is about £700, and he had no chance of becoming a captain. But he made his pirate career very quickly. About a month and a half after transforming from an honest but poor second mate into an adventurer, the adventure happened. And it was like this. The pirates set course for the island of Principe, planning another nefarious pirate deed. In principle, this is a small island of the country of São Tomé and Príncipe, located off the west coast of Africa in the Gulf of Guinea. Its area is only 142 square kilometers, or 55 square miles, including coastal islets. It then belonged to Portugal. The pirate Captain Davis raised the flags of a British warship, and he was allowed to enter the harbor. For several days, the pirates pondered their dark deed, and finally, Davis invited the governor aboard for dinner, intending to take him hostage and demand a ransom. It was supposed to be a simple two-step plan. He himself sailed in a boat for the governor, and they first invited him to the fort to drink wine. The Portuguese turned out not to be fools and quickly realized that their visitors were pirates. A shootout ensued, in which the leader of the robbers, Davis, received a fatal wound and quickly died. The pirates had to elect a new captain, and unexpectedly, this captain turned out to be Roberts. Historians believe he was chosen for his navigational skills and personality, which, as history shows, was quite extraordinary. Roberts' first bloody deed as captain was revenge on the overly observant islanders. He decided to bring the crew back to Principe to avenge the death of the slain Davis. Roberts and his crew landed on the island in the dark of night, killed most of the male population, and stole all the valuable items they could carry. Soon after this, he captured the British ship Experiment. The combination of bravery and success marked the first pirate adventure of the new captain, adding him a considerable amount of authority among the crew. The bandits decided that with the new captain, they would gain more benefit in their robbery business, and they were not mistaken. They were going to set sail for the West Indies when they encountered a fleet of 2 Portuguese merchant ships waiting for an escort in the Bay of Todos os Santos. Roberts captured the nearest one and forced it to point out the richest ship in the fleet. The trembling captain offered to rob the Sagrada Familia, a ship with 40 guns and a crew of 170 men, which Roberts and his friends boarded. On this vessel were 40,000 gold and jewels intended for the King of Portugal, including a cross with diamonds. Apparently, Bartholomew Roberts did not like kings and, in general, was officially very disrespectful to them. In relation to the King of Portugal, this disrespect was compounded by particular cynicism. We will not repeat here the comments and remarks of Black Bart about the monarch, which witnesses reported at the trial, because YouTube rules do not welcome this. We will only emphasize that Roberts hated any representatives of official authority, regardless of their rank. In September 1720, he captured Florent Montoya y Montiel, the governor of Martinique, who was sailing aboard a 52-gun French frigate. The pirates approached the warship and presented themselves as a merchant ship. While the captain of the frigate trustingly flapped his ears, the pirates managed to fire a couple of broadsides from their cannons, and then Roberts and his cutthroats boarded the warship and, with the help of pistols and sabers, captured it. The governor was severely beaten and hanged on the yardarm of his own ship. However, some writers, citing certain French sources, claim that although the fact of the governor's capture did occur and Roberts did indeed torture French officials, including Governor Montoya y Montiel, he did not hang the governor but released him. We might not assert the opposite if these writers indicated where the governor went after being kidnapped by pirates, and why we should not trust the words of Lieutenant Governor of the Bermuda Islands Bennett, who interrogated the surviving witnesses of this incident and confirmed the version of the hanging of Montoya. Especially since no traces of Governor Montoya y Montiel remained in history after this case. Nevertheless, Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart, had a good run. By the 1720s, the Royal Navy pirate hunters began to seriously pursue and catch them. On February 5, 1722, the frigate Swallow, a well-armed warship commanded by a pirate hunter named Captain Chaloner Ogle, cornered the Royal Fortune Ranger and the Little Ranger standing at anchor off Cape Lopez. When the Swallow turned and began to sail back out to sea, the pirates thought it was their ship, and the Ranger, under the command of the pirate James Esquerem, rushed in pursuit. As soon as the Swallow disappeared from the pirates' field of vision, The ship remaining in the bay turned around, the gun ports opened, and a crushing broadside was fired. As a result, 10 bandits were killed, and their captain, James Skyrm, had his leg blown off. The pirates quickly got bored and surrendered. On February 10th, the Swallow returned to Lopez and unexpectedly found that the Royal Fortune was still at anchor. The day before, Roberts and his crew had captured a rich merchant ship, and most of the crew was still celebrating and drunk when the sails of the Swallow appeared on the horizon. At first, the pirates thought it was the Ranger returning. However, a deserter from the Royal Navy recognized his ship and reported this to Roberts, who was having breakfast on the deck under an awning. Roberts that day was a gallant figure. He was dressed in a rich crimson damask waistcoat and breeches with red feathers, a hat with a gold chain around his neck, on which hung that very diamond cross. The experienced pirate decided not to risk it, to avoid battle, and sail into the ocean. Roberts' plan was to sail past the enemy ship, fire one broadside, but ultimately to sail away at full sail. However, Roberts' helmsman failed to keep the ship on the correct course, and the Swallow, skillfully maneuvering, managed to deliver 2 successful broadsides. Roberts was killed by grapeshot, which tore his carotid artery and instantly killed him. Remembering the promise given to him for this case, the pirates threw the commander's body overboard so that his decaying corpse would not hang for long months on chains for the amusement of idle crowds of onlookers. They wrapped him in one of the sails, added a couple of boulders, and splashed into the sea. It was said that the vengeful monarch of Portugal could not rest, and ordered to find him to desecrate the corpse, as was usually done with the executed. There are traditions, but naturally, the body of the legendary bandit was never found, including that very diamond cross. However, despite the death of Bartholomew Roberts, the battle continued for several more hours until the mainmast of the Royal Fortune was destroyed. The pirates begged for mercy and surrendered to the king's mercy. However, when the smoke cleared, the weapons were laid down. It turned out that only 3 pirates, including Roberts, were killed, the rest remained. However, one of the crew members named John Phillips tried to blow up the powder magazine, but this vile sabotage was thwarted by other crew members, and the terrorists were tied up. Not everyone wanted to die beautifully for the joy of pirate romance admirers. In the end, the Royal Navy captured 272 of the rest, of whom 54 were sentenced to hanging. Captain Chaloner Ogle, who killed Roberts, was awarded a knighthood and gold taken from the captured pirates. He later became an admiral of the British Royal Navy. And you dear friends, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you do this, we will look for new stories for you. Continuation soon.